learning to fly, without wings, learning to fly, coming down, learning to fly is the hardest thing.
Good afternoon. I know that many of us are here from all around the world. Different countries, different companies, different organizations, and we have different roles within that organizations, different responsibilities. But all of us, regardless of where we're from, what company we work for, or what role we have something in common, which is all of us want to grow those organizations, to see them succeed. The question, though, is how do we do that? How do we think about the future when we don't know what the future will bring? How do we deal with the uncertainty that is constantly racking ourselves and our organizations and the world as a whole? Whether it's AI and other sorts of technology, whether it's global political change, whether it's climate change, the pace of change is not going to slow down. How do we become better at dealing with change? And how do we become better at changing the minds and actions of those around us? Well, that's what I'm going to talk about today. I don't have to tell you that change is here, and I don't have to tell you that change is here to stay. The question is what we, as leaders, can do about it. How we can help our teams and organizations deal with change more effectively and help people move forward, even with all the headwinds that are holding folks back. And so I'll talk about a few different things today. I'll talk about how we can change minds, how we can drive action, and how we can move forward, even in these challenging times. And so as was nicely mentioned, I'm Professor Jonah Berger. I'm a marketing professor at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. And today what I'm gonna do is lay out a playbook for changing minds and driving action. I'll talk about why people change, why they don't, and most importantly, what we can do about it, right? Often when we think about changing minds and driving action, we take a particular type of approach. We push, we add facts, we add figures, we add reasons, we add information, but often that doesn't work. And so the question is what will help us move forward? Now, I have to apologize for a second. It looks like this clicker is not working. So would one of the AV folks, there we go. Thank you, wonderful, appreciate it. So these are some of the things I'm gonna talk about today. How we can return to growth in this new world, change minds and drive action and grow as leaders. And as very nicely mentioned, I'm Professor Jonah Berger. So let me dive right in here. So you're on a hero's journey. And what do I mean by that? Well, each of us is setting out on a quest. We have some outcome we want to achieve. You may want to help your organization grow. You may want to change the way your team approaches something. You might want to get a customer or client on board to change their mind. But in every hero's journey, there's a villain. Thank you, appreciate it. Trade ya, thanks. And in this hero's journey, the villain has a name, and that is none other than the status quo bias. How many of you have heard of the status quo bias? Quick show of hands. At least a couple of you, okay. If I asked you to define the status quo bias, you might say, well, we've always done it that way. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Why change? It's working well enough. Why do we need to move forward? All of these are examples of the status quo. It turns out that anytime people are making a choice, they're often making a choice between at least two things: an old thing and a new thing, the status quo and something different. And every time we're making that choice, we have a tendency to stick with the old product, the old service, the old idea, the old way of doing things. Now that by itself is not a bias, because it could be that the old thing is better. The product that consumers have been using, the service that businesses have been trying to use themselves, the ideas that we've espoused, they might be good enough. But it turns out that even when the new thing is better, even when the new thing is up to 2.6 times better, people still have a tendency to stick with the old. That's why it's a bias. And there are three key factors that underlie the status quo bias. And you've probably thought about a few of them at least already. The first is very simple: ease. It's just easier to do whatever we've done in the past. Easier to buy the same product, use the same service, support the same idea or initiative within an organization. I'll give you a simple example. We've never gone grocery shopping before together, but I bet every time you go to the store, you buy the same stuff again and again. Probably buy the same size milk from the same manufacturer. Probably buy the same number of eggs from the same company. Why? It's just easier. It requires less work to buy the stuff you've bought before. Now, if that's true for something as simple as milk and eggs, think about how much more complicated it gets for something like B2B software, right? Enterprise level software, for example, or some back-end sort of thing that takes a lot more effort to change. Easier to stick with the old, harder to move to the new. So that's the first thing, ease. The second is attachment. And what do I mean by attachment? Well, there was a really nice study that was done that looked at the selling prices of homes. And they found that the longer someone's lived in a home or apartment, the more they value that home or apartment above and beyond market price. So sure enough, we hope that the market will go up over time, but even controlling for that, the longer we've lived somewhere, the more we value it. Why? Because it's ours. It's no longer just four walls, it's no longer just an apartment or a home, it's our home. We have all the memories there. We don't want to let it go. We value it more. Note the same thing holds for founder-led or family-owned businesses. Family-owned businesses often value themselves more than others do because it's theirs, right? And the same is true within organizations. Think about ideas, right? If I asked you whose ideas you like more, your own or someone else's, I bet most of you would say your own, right? We all love our own ideas. Our ideas are fantastic, at least mine are fantastic. I don't know about yours, but my ideas are fantastic. Why? We become attached to our ideas. If it's ours, we like it more, but that means we're less willing to let it go. So there's ease, there's attachment, and there's one more piece, which is that old things feel safe and new things feel risky. And what do I mean by that? Well, old things aren't perfect. The old product, the old service, the old way of doing things, sure, it's not perfect, but at least we know what the problems are. That new thing, that new piece of technology, that new approach, that new idea, well, it sounds pretty good, but I don't know. I don't know about all the downsides. It feels pretty risky. I'm gonna stay away. And so ease, attachment, and risk aversion are the three horsemen of inertia. All of those things hold back change from happening. How can we move people forward with all those headwinds? How can we get people to change even when there are so many things holding them back? And so as I mentioned, usually when we think about changing minds and driving action, we think about a particular set of approaches. And that's something I would call pushing. And what do I mean by that? Well, if we wanna sell something, we think if we just send more email or make one more phone call, that potential client will come around. If we're talking about consumers, we just need to advertise more or send out more information. If we're talking about a colleague at work, if I just make one more PowerPoint presentation, if I just send along one more 400-page PDF where the really exciting pieces are in the footnotes, because everyone's gonna read all the footnotes in that 400-page PDF, then that'll get people to come around. We think if we just push a little harder, people will change. And it's clear why we think pushing works. There's a chair in the middle of a room and we wanna get it to go. Well, pushing is a great way to do that. We provide some force on one side of the chair and it slides across the floor. And so often we apply that same idea to people. We think, hey, if we just push people, people will come around. But think about the last time someone pushed you. Think about the last time someone tried to get you to do something, or even worse, think about the last time you tried to get someone else to do something. Did pushing work? Probably not. Think about what happened. When you pushed someone, what did they do? They pushed back. They dug in their heels. They resisted. They thought about all the reasons they didn't want to do what you suggested. Because the more we push people, the more they resist. And so if pushing doesn't work, what does? Well, there's a really nice analogy here to be made to chemistry. Is anyone here a chemist, by the way? A couple people. Okay, at least that one person back there. I see at least one proud hand. Great. So I'm not smart enough to be a chemist, but I have good friends who are. And they talk about how chemical change is really hard. Think about carbon being squeezed together into a diamond. Think about plant matter being turned into oil over eons of time. It often takes a lot of time for chemical change to occur. Now in the lab, chemists can't wait that long. They can't, they gotta move faster. So they add temperature or pressure, they add energy to the system to create change. They heat things up, they squeeze them together to hopefully create that change. But there's a special set of substances that chemists often use that make change happen faster and easier. These substances do everything to clean the grime on your contact lenses, if you wear contacts, to clean the grime on your car's engine, and multiple Nobel Prizes have been won for innovations in this space. And these substances very simply are called catalysts. Now, when we think about the word catalyst in our social world, we often say, well, so-and-so was a catalyst, or this thing was a catalyst. And what do we usually mean? We mean, well, this was the thing that came along right before change occurred. But in chemistry, catalysts actually have a very specific meaning. They don't just create and enable change, they allow change to happen with less energy, not more. They identify the barriers or roadblocks that are getting in the way and figure out how to mitigate them. And so that same insight can be applied to our social world. Rather than saying, well, hey, what could I do to get this person or group to change? We need to ask a subtly, but importantly different question. Why hasn't this person changed already? What's stopping them? What are the barriers or obstacles that are getting in the way, and how by mitigating those barriers or obstacles can we make change more likely? It's almost like being parked in a car, for example. So imagine you come out of a movie or you come out of a sports game or something like that, and your car is parked on a hill, right? So you get in the car, you stick the key in the ignition, and you step the foot on the gas. Now, if the car doesn't go, we say, I just need more gas. Same thing with that consumer. Same thing with that customer. Same thing with that colleague. Colleague not on board? Let me send one more email or stop by their office. Consumer hasn't changed their mind? Let me advertise a little bit more. Prospect hasn't turned into client? Let me make one more phone call. We think if we just push harder, if we just step on that gas a little more, people will change. But here's the problem. The parking brake is pulled up in that car. You can step on the gas all you want, not gonna go much of anywhere. We've gotta get better at finding the parking brakes. We've gotta get better at identifying the barriers or obstacles that are getting in the way and figuring out how to mitigate them. So in writing The Catalyst, I've talked to an amazing set of change agents. I've talked to top-selling salespeople and transformational leaders and people who change their boss's mind. But I've also talked to some more unusual change agents. I talked to hostage negotiators. I talked to substance abuse counselors. I talked to parenting experts, which at least from my personal experience, any of you have a 5-year-old at home might agree is the most difficult audience to change. Again and again, same 5 barriers came up. So in my book, The Catalyst, I put them in a framework, which is called the REDUCE framework. The R stands for reactance, the E stands for endowment, the D stands for distance, the U stands for uncertainty, and the CE stands for corroborating evidence. Whether it's a customer, a client, a colleague, anyone you're trying to change, these 5 barriers come up again and again. And I love that they spell the word reduce, because that's exactly what great change agents do. That's exactly what we need to do to return to growth. We need to stop pushing, stop sending so many emails and phone calls and think if we just give people more information, they will change, and instead reduce the roadblocks. Figure out what those barriers are to change and mitigate them, right? Often we know a lot about the outcome we want to achieve as leaders. We know a lot less about the people or groups we're trying to change. The more we understand them, the more effective we can be as change agents. Now, I won't have time today to go through the entire framework. If you're interested, it's part of my book, The Catalyst. I believe there's some resources that the great NBF folks here have posted on the online platform with a one-pager and a workbook you can download and work on with your team, so check those out there. I've picked a couple principles. I'll start with reactance, and I'll spend some time on certainty, because I think those two are really useful for some of the challenges you guys are wrestling with. But please treat this as an introduction. Hopefully this is a first step to understanding how to use these tools to reduce the barriers to change. And my goal today is very simple. I hope you have a nice time. I hope you enjoy it. But what I really hope is that you walk out of here with at least 2 or 3, not even 4 or 5 things you can do tomorrow to make change more likely. Right? This is a wonderful event. It's been a great honor to speak here. I hope you've enjoyed these 2 days of speakers. It's certainly been a wonderful time for myself and others. But we want to walk out of here not just having a good time, but having actionable insights. And so that's what I'm going to challenge you to do for the next 20, 30 minutes we have together. As you hear these tools, think about how you can use them. Think about how you can use them to achieve that change that you want to see out there, and you can use it to return to growth. Okay, so let's dive in. And to do that, I want to start talking about reactance, and to do that, I want to start by talking about these. Anyone have any idea what these are? What are they? Dishwashing pods. They're actually laundry pods. They're a picture of a particular type of laundry pod from the United States called Tide Pods. I want to tell you a story about Tide Pods, okay? So a number of years ago, Tide, owned by Procter & Gamble, wanted to make doing laundry faster and easier. Now, doing laundry is not that difficult. We've all done laundry before, but it turns out there are 3 key challenges. First, you never know exactly how much detergent to add. Second, it's messy. The powder or the liquid gets on your hands or the counter. And third, it ends up it would be best if some of the detergent went in early in the cycle and other parts of the detergent went in later, but you can't do that with traditional liquid or powder detergent. So they spend a bunch of money on research and development, and they end up coming up with these colorful squares called Tide Pods. Essentially, set it and forget it. They're one of these beautiful things in the laundry, takes care of all the problems we've talked about already. They spend $100 million on marketing, and they hope they can take a big chunk of the over $1 billion laundry industry. So Tide Pods come out, and they're doing okay, but then they hit a snag, which is that people are eating them. And I want to pause here for just a second. This is the moment where some of you might wonder, am I translating this incorrectly? Did you hear me correctly? Aren't they filled with chemicals? Yes, they're filled with chemicals, and yes, people were eating them. There was a video where someone was saying they looked good enough to eat. There were pictures of them melted on top of pizza, and suddenly mostly young people were challenging one another to eat Tide Pods. Imagine you're an executive of this company in this moment. Imagine you're sitting there going, well, what in the world should we do? I mean, people should know not to eat Tide Pods. So what do we do? Well, just in case they did what companies often do when they don't know what to do, they put out a press release. Because of course, press releases solve everything. And it was titled very simply, "Don't Eat Tide Pods." And in case that wasn't enough, they also did what companies often do. They hired a celebrity. This gentleman, Rob Gronkowski, a professional football player from the United States, to shoot a public service announcement saying, "Don't eat Tide Pods." So they told people not to eat Tide Pods. A celebrity told them not to eat Tide Pods. They thought that would be the end of it. Well, let's look at some data. I'm a data guy, I always like data. So here's data for the searches for the Tide Pod Challenge over time. And what do you notice? Well, it's going up until the moment that Tide releases their announcement. Now, Tide is hoping that their announcement will stem the tide of the interest in the Tide Pod Challenge, that people will stop searching for it and stop doing it, and that will be the end of it. That's not what happened. In fact, just the opposite. Interest in the Tide Pod Challenge shot up over 400% when their message came out. Visits to poison control shot up as well. In the next 2 weeks, more people came into poison control than had in the 2 years prior. Very simply, a warning became a recommendation. Telling people not to do something actually made them more likely to do it. Now you might be sitting there going, well, this is an interesting story, but what does this have to do with me? I mean, I don't work for Tide, and I'm trying to get people to do something, not to do something. But this example is just one example of a much bigger idea, which is reactance. When pushed, whether to do something or not to do something, people push back. They often do the exact opposite of what we want them to do. So let's spend a couple minutes unpacking this idea of reactance and then talking about how to reduce it. So at the core, reactance is about agency and control. What do I mean by that? People want to be in the driver's seat of their lives. Why did I buy a certain product? Why did I use a certain service? Why did I support a certain idea at the office? I did it because I thought it was a good idea. But as soon as you come around, whether you are a marketer, whether you are a salesperson, whether you are a boss, whether you're a colleague, whether you're a parent, whoever you are, and as soon as you start saying, hey, I think you should do this, now that person is no longer sure who's in the driver's seat. Are they in the driver's seat or are you in the driver's seat? And the more they feel like you're in the driver's seat, the less interested they become in doing that thing. Essentially, people have an ingrained anti-persuasion radar. And what do I mean by that? Well, think about maybe one of those old movies where there's a submarine or there's a boat and they have the aircraft radar and they're sort of scanning the environment for incoming planes or projectiles. We as humans have the same thing with persuasion attempts. We sit there and we scan the environment for persuasion attempts. And when we feel like someone is trying to persuade us, we engage in defensive measures to avoid being persuaded. Think about what happens when a telemarketer calls you on your phone. You don't sit there going, oh, I can't wait to pick up and see what this person's calling about. No, right? You send it to voicemail. Think about when you get a junk text or a junk email, a LinkedIn request from a salesperson, right? You avoid or ignore those things. When we listen to advertising, we don't just sit there, right? We change the channel. Or even worse, you do exactly what all of you are doing right now. When we hear someone speak, when we read a piece of persuasive communication, we don't just sit there going, yes. We sit there going, yes, but. Yeah, Professor Berger, this is interesting, but does it really apply to my business? Sure, I get how this applies to this part of my business, but what about this other part? We poke and prod the arguments till they come crumbling down. And so if pushing doesn't work, what does? Well, we need to stop trying to persuade people so much and get them to persuade themselves. We need to stop trying to sell people so much and get them to buy in. We need to allow for agency. We need to give people back some of that sense of freedom and control and put them in the driver's seat. And I recognize that sounds like magic. So let me give you 3 very concrete strategies to do exactly that. In the book, I talk about 4, maybe even 5 or 6, but here I'll give you 3, and I'll start painfully simple. The first strategy is called providing a menu. And what do I mean by that? Well, often when we want people to do something, we say, hey, I think you should do X. I think you should buy this product. I think you should use this service. I think you should support this change in strategy. And then here are all the reasons why I think that's a good idea. But if we think about it, what is the listener doing when we're making that communication, when we're suggesting why they should do what we want to do? They're sitting there going, yes, but. Well, of course, you want me to buy this product. This product is from your company. No company says their products aren't good. How do I know it's any good? Of course, you want me to buy this service. This service is something you represent. You're only going to talk about the upsides. Of course, you support this initiative. It benefits your part of the organization, but what about me? They poke and prod the argument till it comes crumbling down. And so what great change agents, great catalysts often do, is they do something slightly different. Rather than giving people one option, they give them multiple. They say, hey, I think you should do X or Y. Which one do you think is better? And notice what that does. It subtly, but importantly, shifts the role of listener. Because now rather than sitting there and thinking about all the reasons you don't want to do what that person suggested, now you've given them a new job. Which of the things you suggested do they like better? And because they're focused on which one they like better, they're much more likely to pick one at the end of the interaction. And it's called providing a menu because this is exactly what happens when you go out to dinner. Most restaurants, when you go out to dinner, they don't say, here's dinner. And they don't say, choose whatever you want. They say, here's a limited set of options, choose from within the choice set. It's choice, but it's guided choice. Notice what they're not doing. They're not saying you have to do this. They're not saying you can do anything. They're giving you a limited set of options, encouraging you to focus on the options you have rather than the ones you don't. Or another way to say it, they've turned a yes or no decision, do I want to do X or not, into a which one decision. Which one do I want to do, X or Y? And because they're focused on the options they have, they're much more likely to do one of those rather than all the other things they could do. Now, as we think about giving people options, how many options should we give people? If you had to throw out a number, what would you say? 2. How many people say 2? How many people say 3? How many people say something else? Okay, there's a couple right answers. 2 is fine, 3 is fine, not 54, not 79, not 2012, because it's too many, because it becomes overwhelming. 2, 3, a limited number of options, so it feels manageable. But let me point out one more thing. Some of the clever of you in the audience may think you've got it, right? I'm gonna give people the option I want them to choose and a terrible option they would never choose. A decoy, something, and so they won't choose that, and so they'll have to choose the one I've suggested. Is that gonna work? No. Why not? Well, 2 reasons it's not gonna work. First, right, they can see right through it. They don't feel it's authentic. But second, you didn't give them a choice. This works when you give people a real choice. When they sit there focused on 2 options that they might consider, and because they're focused on the options on the table, they ignore the options off the table, right? Provide a menu of real options that they'd actually consider. They focus on the choice they have rather than the ones that they don't. So that's strategy number 1. Strategy number 2 is called ask, don't tell. And the idea here very simply is questions rather than statements. When we make statements, people push back. When we ask questions, something different happens. I was working with a leader a few years ago and she was having trouble motivating her team. She needed them to stay late and put in extra hours, but they didn't want to. They were tired and they were burnt out. So finally she calls a meeting and she says, hey, what kind of company do we want to be? A good company or a great company? And everyone goes, a great company, of course, right? And then she asks a real question. How do we get there? How do we become a great organization? And she starts having a conversation, and different people in the room suggest different things. Because good questions do three things. First, they deactivate that anti-persuasion radar. Rather than sitting there and think about all the things they don't like about what she's suggesting, instead they're doing something different. They're sharing their opinion, which, let me tell you, everyone loves sharing their opinion, right? There are few things that people like doing more than sharing their opinion, so that's good to start. But second, great questions allow you as a leader to collect information. Too often we don't know enough about our audience to change their mind. Great questions allow us to collect that information. Figure out a better solution to the same problem or a different path to the same outcome, collecting that information. But the third part is equally interesting, and that good questions encourage commitment to the conclusion. Because if she says, hey, how do we become a great organization? And someone says, I think we should do X, Y, Z. And she says, fantastic, we're gonna do X, Y, Z. It's a lot harder for them not to be on board because it was their idea in the first place. I was giving this presentation a little while ago and someone said, it's so funny. My boss loves feeling like everything is his idea. I said, that's interesting. I don't think it's just your boss though. Everyone likes feeling like something is their idea. The more it's theirs, the more ownership they have over it. And so the secret here is to give away ownership. Too often we want to get credit for something. We want to say it's our idea, we get credit for it. Maybe that'll help us get promoted, but it'll also decrease the chance that anyone actually wants to do it. Whereas if we give away that idea, if we make it other people's idea, also if we allow them to participate in the process of forming it or the outcome, the more ownership they have over it, the more they'll want to see it succeed, and the more they'll drive it forward. Asking rather than telling. Let me give you one last strategy. This is called highlighting a gap. And to do this, I'm gonna show you an anti-smoking ad from Thailand. You might say, well, what in the world does an anti-smoking ad from Thailand have to do with me? You will quickly see. It is not in English, but there are English subtitles at the bottom. I'm sorry, it won't be in Finnish either, apologies. English subtitles at the bottom. Take a quick look at the video, and then we'll talk about why it worked in just a minute. Okay, so here we go.
ไม่ให้ฮะจ่าเลยดูดไม่ดีนะเลิกดูดได้มันมียาฆ่าแมลงอยู่ในใบบุหรี่ด้วยนะดูดแล้วหน้าแก่นะสูบบุหรี่แล้วก็ตายเร็วไม่อยากอยู่เล่นนานๆแล้วมันไม่ดีรู้เปล่าสูบแล้วเป็นทั้งมะเร็งปอดโรคโป่งพองเส้นเลือดในสมองแตก
ไม่ดีแล้วพี่ดูดทำไมล่ะคะ
Pretty powerful campaign, right? So let's dig a little bit deeper. So first, hugely successful. 40% increase in calls to the quit line. Videos of the campaign go viral around the web, get millions of views. But what's more interesting is why this campaign worked. Now, the Thai Health Promotion Foundation realized they had a problem, which is if they just tell people about the dangers of smoking, are smokers gonna listen? No. In fact, by the way, you can tell smokers already know about all the dangers of smoking. Lung cancer, emphysema, strokes, they're like a veritable doctor in their knowledge of the dangers of smoking, and yet they're still doing it. Just like us, information is not enough. I can't tell you how many clients I've worked with who say, look, if we just give people more information, they will come around. Information is rarely enough to get people to change. We've got to do something else. We've got to figure out a different approach. And that's exactly what they did here. They realized a key insight. And you might say, well, why did this work? It involved kids, it involved emotion, but it's more complicated than both of those things. It turns out that people like their attitudes and their actions to line up. And what do I mean by that? Well, if I say I care about the environment, I better recycle. If I say I care about a certain sports team, I better watch their games once in a while. I want what I say and what I do to line up. And if they don't line up, if there's a misfit between attitudes and actions, I do work to bring them in line. It's called cognitive dissonance. I do work to bring those things in line, which is exactly what happened here. So the smokers got asked this question, and now they're stuck. They could tell the kids to smoke, which they're not going to do, or they could think about quitting themselves, which is what 40% of this did. Because this program highlighted that gap between attitudes and action. It pointed out to the smokers, look, hey, you're saying one thing and you're doing something else. And the word highlight, though, is very important. Smokers never would have told children to smoke. It's a terrible idea. They never would have done it. But no one had asked them. But if you ask them, suddenly now they're stuck and they have to behave accordingly. And it's not just smokers. And I was working with an organization where they were trying to kill an old initiative. It wasn't working, it was over budget, but someone was attached to it and they didn't want to let it go. And so they were pushing him and pushing him and pushing him, and he didn't listen. And so finally, one of the sharp employees there had a different idea. She asked the guy, she said, hey, there's another part of the organization that's thinking about doing something similar. Would you recommend that they do something similar? And the gentleman thought about it for a minute. He said, I don't think I'd recommend they do something similar. Given what I know now, I don't think I'd recommend it. And she said, oh, that's interesting. But then why are we still doing it? And 2 weeks later, that program was shuttered. Not because she told him to shutter the program, right? Because she helped him realize it himself. And that's the idea of highlighting a gap here. Is this the same as telling someone they're a hypocrite? No, right? Usually when you tell someone that they're wrong, when they're a hypocrite, they're not necessarily gonna listen, right? At least in our household, when I tell my spouse that she's wrong, she doesn't say, oh, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. No, she says, screw you, I'm not gonna listen to you. Right? No one likes being told that they're wrong. No one likes being told that they're inconsistent. But if you can highlight a gap, if you can show them a way that they're being inconsistent, encourage them to realize it themselves, they're much more likely to do the work to bring it in line. Those are 3 simple strategies for allowing for agency and reducing reactance. There are a couple more in the book, but we don't have time. I'm gonna move to a different principle. I won't talk about the E today for endowment. I won't talk about the D for distance. I wanna spend 5 minutes talking about uncertainty, and then I will wrap up. And I wanna talk about uncertainty here because we live in a world of uncertainty. Uncertainty is now a given. We're not gonna get away from it. How can we deal with it more effectively? And underneath that uncertainty are some important psychological pieces. One is what's called switching costs. Has anyone heard of switching costs before? Okay, at least a couple of you, right? So think about what switching costs might be. Imagine you're moving from one apartment to another, right? Not only do you need to pay for that new place, but you need to move all your stuff and figure out where things go. Imagine switching from one brand of computer to another computer, or switching from a traditional vehicle to an electric vehicle. Not only are there the monetary costs of change, but they're also the time and energy costs as well. Often we focus on the monetary ones, we ignore the others, but they're just as important. The costs of change stymie action. They make people less likely to do what we want them to do. They say, oh, change has costs. No thanks, I'll stick with doing what I'm doing. But let me tell you, it gets worse. Think about what happens first. Is it the cost of change or the benefits of change? Which happens first? The costs, right? We almost always have to pay the cost now to get the benefits later. But think about where there's more uncertainty as well. Are there more uncertainty in the cost of change or the benefits? No, there's more uncertainty with the benefits. And so if you notice, you're asking people to take sure costs now for uncertain benefits later. No wonder they don't want to change, right? You're telling them, promise me, I promise you it'll be great. You just trust me. No wonder they don't want to change. This is called the cost-benefit timing gap. Costs are now, benefits are later. Costs are certain, benefits are uncertain. No wonder no one wants to change. It's not just that change is costly, it's that costs are now and benefits are later. But let me tell you, it gets worse. There was a study that was done a number of years ago at Stanford University, where they asked students to imagine at the end of the semester, and they just took a tough exam, but they passed. They feel tired and run down, and they have a chance to go on a Hawaii vacation for a low price. And they ask the students, would you buy the package, not buy the package, or decide later? Now the students are sitting there saying, I'm feeling pretty good. I just passed this exam. I'll go ahead and buy that vacation package. And that makes sense. But there's a second group of students. Everything for that second group is identical with one key detail different. You didn't pass the exam. Unfortunately, you failed. Sorry, you failed the exam. Do you want to buy the vacation package, not buy the package, or decide later? Now the failures don't feel good, they feel bad, but you can't take the exam until next semester anyway. You got to study somewhere, you got to rest and recuperate. So they say, look, I'll buy the vacation package. I'll go to Hawaii, I'll feel better, and I'll buy the package. But there's actually a third group as well. Everything for the third group is identical with one key detail changed. There is uncertainty. You'll find out tomorrow whether you passed or you failed. Do you want to buy the package, not buy the package, or decide later? Now, what I love about this example, what I love about this study, is any of you have a background in finance or economics or decision analysis, or if you're mildly paying attention, you know what people should do. They're at a decision point. If they pass the exam, they'll want to do what? Buy the package. If they end up failing the exam, they'll want to do what? Buy the package. And so even though they don't know yet what's going to happen, what should they do? Buy the package, because either way, they'll want to have bought the package. What do you think they actually do? Decide later. When people don't know what to do, they do nothing. They hit the pause button. They say, hey, I'm going to stop and wait for the uncertainty resolve if it ever does. And if the lesson of COVID and all the change that's going on in our environment has taught us anything, is that the uncertainty will not resolve. And so how do we get people to unpause? How do we get them to move forward even when so many headwinds are holding them back? Well, let me give you a couple examples. There's a great one from a company called Dropbox. Most of you familiar with Dropbox? Yes? Okay, some of you have probably even used Dropbox while I've been speaking, maybe even. Very successful cloud storage business, initially had a lot of trouble getting off the ground. Why? People were uncertain. They were used to storing things on their desktop. Dropbox said they were gonna be great, but how do people actually know if they're gonna be great? And so Dropbox was saying, well, we'll spend money on advertising, we'll buy Google keywords, but they realized it wouldn't solve the fundamental issue, which is that people are uncertain. And telling them that the product was great, the service was great, wasn't going to solve that uncertainty. So what could they do? Well, they gave Dropbox away for free. Anyone who was interested could get up to 2 gigabytes of storage absolutely free. Now it's clear why consumers would like something for free. Who wouldn't like something for free? But how do you build $1 billion business giving away something for free? Well, they didn't just give away something for free, they harnessed a principle called freemium. How many of you have heard of the term freemium? Okay, a number of you. It's a combination of 2 words, free and premium, right? Yes, there was a free version of software, but there's a premium version you could upgrade to pay an additional fee, more space, more features, and so on. And even if you haven't heard the word freemium, you've used something that uses that idea of freemium. Many newspapers have freemium. Zoom has freemium. Dropbox, Skype, LinkedIn, all of these software as a services often use freemium. In fact, there's a whole chapter, an appendix in the back of the book where I talk about applying freemium. It's an amazing tool. You have to think about the right way to do it, right? The right way to lower that uncertainty, what to give away and how much, but it's an amazing approach. Sometimes though I work with clients, I say, look, I love the idea of freemium, but how do you apply it to my business? I mean, I get how it works for software as a service, but what if I'm a hospital or a fleet management company or a chemical company? How do I use freemium in those situations? Well, it turns out freemium is just one example of a much bigger idea. Imagine you go to the car dealership. You're interested in buying a new car. You walk onto the dealership and they say, oh, you're interested in the new car? Pay us $50,000 and we'll let you check it out. You'd say, no way. I'm not gonna pay you the money if I don't know that I like the car already. So what do they do to solve this problem? Well, they don't use freemium, they just use a test drive. But a test drive, either at the car dealership or the Apple store, does the same thing that freemium does. Because it's not about freemium, it's about a bigger idea, and that is lowering the barrier to trial, right? Test drives do the same thing. They let people experience the vehicle without having to pay all those upfront costs. Same with free shipping. Free shipping has enabled e-commerce. People were happy to order things online, but they didn't want to have to pay for the privilege of doing so. Why? Because you don't think about what you pay for when you go to the store, which is in your time, right? Rather than in terms of money, right? But free shipping allows you not to have to pay to get it at home. Same with free samples at the grocery store. Same with renting rather than buying, right? If you had to buy, for example, skis to learn to ski, no one would ever ski. Same with heavy machinery. Sometimes you don't want to buy it, you want to rent it. It lowers the upfront cost. And so that's the key insight here. How can we make it easier for people to try what we're offering, experience that value? Because easier to try means more likely to buy. Now let me give you one last example here and then I'm gonna wrap up. You might say, look, Professor Berger, I think this is interesting. I love the idea of freemium, but could you apply this to ideas? I get it for products, I get it for services, but what about ideas? Can you apply this to ideas? And so I wanna tell you a story. A few years ago in Mexico, there was a city that had lots of pollution. Lots of traffic, lots of pollution. So they started an initiative to clean up the roads. They put in big bike lanes, they put in more bus lanes to encourage people to take more environmentally sustainable transportation. And so a few weeks go by, they have a big celebration announcing this change. People are using the buses, but no one's in the bike lanes. And so the city starts asking around, they find that people aren't using the bike lanes because the bus drivers are driving too close to the bikes and the bikers don't feel comfortable. So they won't bike to work. So the city calls the bus company, say, look, your drivers have to move over. The bus company says, fine, no problem, we'll have them move over. They talk to their drivers, the drivers say yes, and they think that'll be the end of the problem. But a couple weeks go by, no one's changed. Drivers are still driving too close to cyclists, so cyclists don't want to go. So the city calls the bus company again, says, look, you got to do something. So the bus company sits all their drivers down. They have a big PowerPoint presentation about the importance of moving over. They threaten to punish their drivers if they don't move over. They threaten to reward their drivers if they do move over. All the standard things we would do in an organization. But those drivers still aren't moving over. Weeks go by, they're still not moving over. So the company's going, well, what do we do? I mean, how do we get these drivers to move over? So finally, one person at the organization has an interesting idea. They have a little gym with an old exercise bike. So they take that exercise bike, they bring it to the area where the drivers sit and have lunch, they put the exercise bike down in the middle of that parking lot, and then they drive a bus very close to the drivers. And let me give you an idea of what that looks like, okay? So here we go. Here's an idea of what it's gonna look like. So next time those drivers are out on the road, you think they're gonna move over a little bit? Probably. Not because someone paid them, not because someone threatened them, but because someone showed them why they needed to move over. Someone lowered that barrier to try, allowed them to experience the value of that idea. And so anytime we're trying to change someone's mind, whether it's a product, a service, or idea, we need to build a flight simulator. Whether that flight simulator is a free trial, whether it's freemium, or whether it's something as simple as putting an old exercise bike in the middle of a parking lot, allowing that person to experience, just as a flight simulator would, why they should adopt our product, our service, or idea, because easier to see it means more likely to take action. Okay, I'm out of time here, so I'm just gonna wrap up. As we talked about this afternoon, catalysts reduce roadblocks. And what do I mean by that? Well, we talked about the R. How can we reduce reactance? Give people choice. Allow for autonomy. Ask, don't tell. Highlight a gap. We talked about the U, right? How can we use freemium? How can we lower the barrier to trial? Make it easier for people to experience the value of the offering without paying the upfront costs. In the catalyst, I talk about the other dimensions as well. Endowment is when people think it's safe to do what they're doing already. New things feel risky, old ones feel safe. We gotta highlight the cost of inaction and show them it's not as safe as they might think. Distance, when we ask for something too far away, people ignore us. We've gotta chunk the change. Take big change, break it down to smaller, more manageable chunks, ask for less, and then ask for more. We talked about uncertainty, and corroborating evidence is multiple sources of proof. To illustrate that last one, there's an old saying that goes something like this. When someone asks if you have a tail, you laugh. Why do you laugh if someone asks if you have a tail? You don't have a tail, right? But if 5 people say you have a tail, what are you gonna do? Probably gonna take a look, right? Because if 5 people say the same thing in short succession, it's a lot harder to believe they're not right? And so multiple sources of proof can be enough to drive action. Let me take one last slide here, just 2 key next steps from this particular talk. I know you've had an amazing set of speakers. This has just been a wonderful event. Let's give a quick applause to the organizers, please. Wonderful, wonderful event. Wonderful, amazing event. So many learnings, so many speakers, so many different things going on. 2 key next steps from this particular talk today. First, find your parking brakes. I've shown you 5 today. I've talked about in depth 2 of them. You may say there's a 6th, there's a 7th, no problem. But figure out what those barriers are. Too often we know a lot about the outcome we want to achieve, a lot less about the people we want to change. But when you go into a doctor's office, they don't start by saying, let me put a cast on your leg, right? They start by saying, let me understand the problem, and only once I understand the problem can I prescribe that solution. We've got to start with understanding and identify those breaks. And then second, figure out how to mitigate them. And in case it's useful, as I mentioned, there's a whole bunch of resources on my website, just jonahberger.com. You can download with your teams. There are also, I believe, they put the resources on the app, and so you guys can download it from the event app. There's a one-pager there, there's an application guide, and so on. Because good news, it's not random, it's not luck, and it's not chance. There's a science behind why people change and why they don't. There's a science behind why growth happens. If we understand how to lower the barriers to change, we can become better catalysts, we can become better leaders, and at the core, we can change anything. Thank you so much.